Hello there, welcome back to Jennie Designs with Paper and this week's episode of Crime and Coloring, where we take an alphabetical journey through the United States and revisit some of the earliest crimes. But before we talk crime, let's talk coloring. This week I am coloring the Anchor of Hope stamp set by Honeybee Stamps. This is a Kelly Taylor illustration. I will be coloring the anchor and the plumeria. I'm also using the Netting A2 cover plate die from Honeybee Stamps. I will be coloring and stamping on Neenah Classic Crest Silver White 80-pound cardstock, right? 2 pieces of pattern paper from the Honeybee Stamps Vitamin C pattern paper collection. I actually did not use this one. I changed it up. And I have a craft colored card base. I will be stamping in Simon Says Stamp Intense Black ink. I did stamp it twice because my ink pad's getting a little dry. It needs to be re-inked. There are a couple of times I had to change up my marker combination because one marker in the combination I had selected was dry. So I used my Sandy Alnog hex chart to pick the next best color to fill in that combination. And I think that maybe next week's Crime and Coloring will be me telling a story while I clean up and refill all of my dry markers. So, if you're along for the story, great. If you're along for the coloring, might not be your favorite video. I did at the end of the video add some Honeybee Stamps flat back pearls, and I used the deckled edge die to cut a piece of paper to pop our anchor or stamped image up off of the background because it was just blending in and looking a little too flat for me. I did pull up a picture of plumeria, and I really was in love with this dark navy one. So that's the color combination I chose. I probably should have chose a complementary color to my background, which is why I didn't like the background and had to change it. But whatever. That's all about the coloring. So let's go ahead and jump on into our crime. Now wow, words are hard. Our alphabetical journey today takes us to New Jersey. The Dutch people were the first Europeans to lay claim to the area that became New Jersey, and they landed in the early 1600s, around 1630, I believe. But by 1664, the New Jersey area had fallen to British control. New Jersey has, since its first European inhabitation, been known for its diversity. People from a variety of religions, cultures, and races found home in the area that became New Jersey. The farming grounds in New Jersey were particularly important to the British government, and that made New Jersey a pivotal place as the colonies began the run toward independence. On December 18, 1787, New Jersey became the third state to ratify the U.S. Constitution, which granted them admission to the Union, and it was the first state to ratify the Bill of Rights on November 20th, 1789. So New Jersey is number 3, right? New Jersey is one of the most densely populated states in the United States, with 90% of its inhabitants living in urban areas. New Jersey is a state where more cars are stolen than any other state annually. And if you've ever played Monopoly, you might recognize some of those street names and places as being locations from Atlantic City. And the first baseball game was played in Hoboken, New Jersey, and the first Miss America pageant was held in Atlantic City, New Jersey. New Jersey does not have a state song, but it does have a state fish, and it is the brook trout. The very first submarine ride took place in the Passaic River. The first drive-in movie theater was built in New Jersey. Cheerleading was first started in Princeton in 1869, and New Jersey has the tallest water tower in the world. And square dancing is the state dance. And there is one family home in New Jersey that was the scene of a murder decided by a coin toss. Yes, a coin toss. We are going to talk about Washington Hunter. Now, Washington Hunter was born on April 27th, 1825 in Cinnamon Township, New Jersey. His parents were William Washington and Sarah Hunter. Washington is listed as the 10th of his parents' 13 children, and it was noted that Washington's grandfather immigrated to Cinnaminson Township in New Jersey from Ireland. But the family record that I found listed his grandfather and his mother both having died in Ireland, so I'm not exactly sure which one is right or which one is wrong. And there was not a lot of sources for either, right? Anyway, Washington lived in the Cinnamon Township area with his family, his parents and siblings, until he purchased the Jeremiah Buck House from Sarah Buck in 1857. So doing a little bit of math, he would have been 27-ish, 22-ish, something like that. I don't know. He was a young man. 57 minus 25. Do the math. In 1861, Washington married 26-year-old Sarah Flanagan. Now, Sarah's family records are very, empty. I cannot even locate the name of her parents. In fact, their birth year is the only thing registered, not a date, not a month even, just the year. What is known about Sarah is that she was educated at the Zane Street Public School in Philadelphia. And I kind of wondered if that was like an orphanage/school, right? She also ended up teaching school for several years before she married Washington. Together, they had one child, a daughter named May, who was born aptly on May 2nd in 1862, but she sadly died before her third birthday on December 15th, 1864, and the couple had no other children. Now, their young married lives, other than the birth and death of their daughter, are only written in family journals, I suppose. There wasn't a lot of public record about who they were and what they did in between their marriage, the birth and death of their daughter, and then the events that led to Washington's death. What was written or noted was that Washington was quite active in politics. He was a Cinnaminson Township. He was on the Cinnaminson Township Committee in 1876, and he served as a freeholder, and that was what they called a county commissioner, or that would have been equivalent to a county commissioner. And he served in that position from 1787 to 1879. He was actively involved with the creation of Delran Township in 1880 and went on to represent Delran as their freeholder or county commissioner in 1881 and 1882. There's not a lot written, like I said, about the rest of their public or private life. He was 36 when he got married, which was maybe a little older than average. He was 52 when he represented his townships as a freeholder. Like, I did the math that time. And like the stories I seem to be fascinated by, the most remarkable thing about Washington and Sarah's story is the story of the events surrounding his death. So around January 25th, 1901, Washington was alone in the lower level of his home when an unknown assailant knocked at the door. Sarah reported that she had already gone upstairs to bed. And after answering the door, the unknown men pushed their way into the house and demanded Washington's money and valuables. Washington was now 76 years old, and he resisted. He was having none of it. And when he resisted, one of the men responded by stabbing him with a chisel. The weirdest murder weapon I think I've come up with yet in any of my crime and coloring stories. However, several veins were cut, and there was a lot of blood. Sarah was awakened. Sarah was woken up when she heard the commotion, and she rushed downstairs to help her husband, who was now lying in a pool of his own blood. So 66-year-old Sarah, I did that math too, dragged him into the bedroom and sat him in a chair and handed him his pistol, propping him up so he was ready and able to shoot. We're going to pause here for a thought that came to me when I was reading this. Sarah reported that she was asleep in an upstairs bedroom, and she woke up to the robbery. Did she drag Washington up the stairs, or did he have a bedroom on the first floor? I'm 50, and I'm not dragging anybody up the stairs. And she was 66. So she's probably stronger than me, though. But anyway, I'm guessing that due to the time and his age, maybe his bedroom was on the bottom floor. I don't know. Anyway, back to the story. So Sarah had rescued Washington and armed him, and then she grabbed a butcher knife for her own protection. And she had barricaded them or put them into this downstairs bedroom and shut the door. And the men eventually broke through the bedroom door. And when they did, they were met with bullets from Washington's pistol. At the sound of gunshots, their farmhand, a man named Joseph Rubach, R-U-B-A-C-H, who had been sleeping, came in with his gun, but it was too late. The intruders were gone. And after looking at the scene in the bedroom, he left to get the doctor, a man named Dr. Small, and he was brought back to treat Washington's injuries. Now, his quick response to the situation was applaudable, but unfortunately, it did not result in Washington surviving the attack. Washington Hunter succumbed to his injuries on January 29, 1901, so just 4 days later. The coroner, a man named William Wells, arrived after Washington's death, and after viewing the body, he quickly impaneled a jury of 6 of the most prominent citizens of the township of Riverside by 2 p.m. on January 30th, 1901. So within 24 hours, or less than 24 hours, the grand jury has been impaneled, and they are looking into the evidence of whether or not this is a murder. About the same time, Detective Ellis Parker was visiting the scene of the invasion along with Davis and Robert Hunter. I could not find their family relation, but the name is spelled the same, so I'm guessing they're familial. And a man named Andrew Kentzinger, who I believe was on the grand jury. So they looked around the home, and they found an oily rag, which they believed had been used to carry in the tool, like the chisel. So the chisel had been wrapped in this oily rag. They also found a bloody hat that had the letters G.A.S. on the inside of the band. I don't know if it was sewn in or penned in. Anyway, the letters were inside the hat band, leading them to believe that would be the initials of the man who owned the home. Their investigation led them to believe that the intruders had left Delran and headed into Mercantville, there we go, and then taken a trolley to Philadelphia. So there was some trail to follow at least. Later in that week, some local boys found a pair of blood-stained trousers on the banks of the Delaware River near the Washington Hunter's home. Now, pressure was on to make an arrest. Obviously, Washington was a loved town member, and people wanted answers. And whether he was loved or not, I guess, is up for debate. He was known, and people figured if somebody this, I don't know what the right word is, connected in their town could have a home invasion, well, they wanted those people caught because that was scary, right? Unfortunately, haste and pressure led to a whole handful of arrests, and I literally mean a handful, like literally a ton of people. The first man arrested was 20-year-old Robert Jenkins, and he was reportedly a farmhand on a farm owned by Washington's nephew, and that farm was less than a mile away from Washington's own home. The evidence. Here's the evidence for arresting Robert. On January 30th, Robert walked into a Pennsylvania hospital with a gunshot wound to his leg. The Philadelphia detectives arrested him and called the coroner, Coroner Wells, so he could be questioned. Robert told the investigators that the shot was self-inflicted and occurred when he dropped his own gun, when he was walking on Strawberry Street near Market Street. Doctors did note that the wound seemed to be fresher than could have occurred the night of Washington's home invasion. Robert was actually released on February 7th. They found the gun exactly where he told them it was, but the most important evidence here was that upon examination of the gunshot wound, it was apparent that it came from the back to the front, and had he been shot by Washington, it would have been from the front to the back. So while they're trying to figure out what's going on with Robert, detectives also went on to capture/arrest a man named John Keogh, Keough. He was a former tenant, and he was reported to be, quote, a dangerous man with a very bad character, end quote. I did not find anything that expounded on what gave him this reputation, but because of this reputation, officers were told to arrest him on sight, like no questions asked, just arrest him. The evidence against John was that he had been seen in Riverside the day of the crime and then had disappeared. He also had the misfortune to wear the same hat size as the bloody hat that they found. Detectives also tried to connect Robert and John because, Sarah has said there was more than one man involved here, but they could not. There was no connection between the two men. So on February 5th, they're still working on John. They're still working on Robert. Another man was arrested. This is a man named Robert Lee, and he was a 35-year-old resident of Camden. I'm going to refer to him by his last name because this is the second Robert in this scenario. So Lee protested loudly, and he ran, but he was captured and taken into custody. The basis of his arrest, he had relatives in Riverside. He had been seen in the vicinity of the Hunter homestead the night of the crime. Oh, and he was a black man. He was an African-American man. That was the totality of the evidence against poor Robert Lee. At the same time, officials also arrested and held a man named Frank McClay on suspicion of being involved, with even less evidence than they had on the other three men. He was released after a few days. So running out of suspects and options, the prosecutor, a man named Samuel Atkinson, and Sarah Hunter, Washington's wife, agreed to provide a reward for the apprehension of the men that robbed the house and inflicted the injuries that led to the death of Washington and the ill health of Sarah. It was reported that her health was in doubt after the shock of the home invasion and the death of her husband. Sarah did not live too many years after the events in January 1901. In fact, she died in February 1905. Now, Detective Parker said he would continue to investigate the matter, but did not believe that there was the slightest evidence against any of the suspects that had currently been arrested. So within a week of the murder, Robert Jenkins, John Kehoe, Robert Lee, and Frank McClay had all been arrested on very little evidence and then released. And it looked like this crime was just going to remain unsolved. The suspects that had been arrested on very flimsy evidence were rightly released. There were no new leads, no modern forensics, and time was slipping away. And time is the enemy of the crime fighter. Then, on March 9th, two men offered more insight into this deadly home invasion. John Young and Otto Keller confessed to the crime and gave details about the crime. Four men, John Young, Otto Keller, Charles Brown, and Charles Miller, became acquainted with each other in New York City. Don't know how, don't know why, don't know under what circumstances, but they became friendly. And they decided at some point in time to commit a robbery someplace in the country because it would be easier to get away with. And if I were a betting woman, which I'm not, I would say that this whole plan happened over a lot of beers because they came up with two locations. One of the men believed that the owner of the house on Long Island kept a large sum of money on hand. And John Young had once worked for Washington Hunter, and he knew that he lived alone with his wife, that they were elderly, and that they had plenty of money. So, unable to come to a consensus on which home to rob, they flipped a coin. Heads, they'd go to Long Island, tails to Riverside. It was tails, just in case you were wondering. It was tails. So the four men took a ferry to Jersey City on January 25th and reached the Hunter house about midnight. According to their confession, so this is John Young and Otto, they knocked on the door and Washington opened it. However, their account differs from Sarah's. They claim that Sarah was actually peering over Washington's shoulder as he opened the door. So she was standing behind him, probably on tiptoes, looking to see who's knocking at their door at midnight. After barging in, they demanded money and a scuttle ensued. A fight broke out. Charles Brown used a chisel to cut deep gashes into Washington, and Mrs. Hunter ran for a gun and fired it, hitting Charles Brown in the groin area. They ran, and in their haste to get away, the wounded man dropped his hat. The proceeds of this coin toss crime, an old silver watch, and $4. Even in 1901, $4 is not astronomical money. $4. After they left the home, Otto Keller says he left the group and returned to Philadelphia. And John Young and the two Charleses walked to Burlington and broke into a church. And the next morning, Charles Brown went into a shop and purchased a new cap and some crackers and cheese. Now, something about Charles must have tripped the storekeeper's spidey sense because the storekeeper paid very close attention to Charles. It appeared to the storekeeper that Charles was in pain, so he watched him closely so he could give the police a good description of the man. I'm not sure what part of he looked like he was in a lot of pain means, I got to know what he looks like to call the police. But clearly something about Charles's behavior and his demeanor alerted the shopkeeper. Now, it turned out that Otto Keller had actually sent a letter of confession to this crime to the local authorities 2 weeks after the crime. 2 weeks. But the police were so busy arresting all the neighbors that very little attention was given to this letter until Otto confessed in person. 3 of the 4 criminals are finally in custody. So we have Otto, John, and Charles Brown, the gunshot victim. Or, I guess he is a victim, but he's not a victim, right? Anyway, a grand jury was convened, and they met on May 14th, 1901, and returned indictments against all 4 men involved in this scheme. All 4 men that Otto had named. Now, the 4 men were not tried all in one group. They were tried independently. And the first trial was for John Young. And it started on September 11th, 1901. And 2 days later, on the 13th, he was found guilty of first-degree murder. Now, naturally, he appealed this conviction to the Court of Errors and Appeals. And in January of 1902, the conviction was upheld and confirmed. On March 18th, 1902, a little more than a year after the home invasion, John Young was hanged for his involvement in the invasion and murder of Washington Hunter. Now, the second trial to go about was for Charles Brown, the one who had been shot. He had been being held in Sing Sing prison, and he was brought in for trial. And I don't know how long his trial, when it started or how long it lasted, but on October 16th, 1901, he was convicted of first-degree murder and scheduled to be hanged on December 3rd, 1901. So his execution was actually scheduled to take place before John Young's appeal came back from the Court of Errors and Appeals. Now, an hour before his execution, Charles armed himself with a lead pipe and shoved past his spiritual advisor in an attempt to escape. It was a failed attempt. He was captured and hanged on December 3rd as planned. So he tried to get away, he was caught and hanged all on the same day. Now, Otto Keller, having turned state's evidence, did not go to trial per se. He had a sentencing hearing because he pled guilty, and he received a 10-year sentence to begin in January of 1903. So 2 years after the murder. On February 25th, 1908, he was released from prison, having served 5 of his 10 years. The 4th man, Charles Miller, was never arrested or tried or convicted. So this is not necessarily an unsolved case, right? But it is intriguing to me for a couple of reasons. The first one that came to mind as I was pondering the story was, why does Sarah's account differ from Otto's? Her location in the home when the men pushed their way in isn't a small detail. She says she was upstairs. They said she was downstairs. Also, she says Washington shot Charles, but the other 3 say that she shot Charles. It's not a small detail. It might not change the outcome of the story, and it definitely doesn't negate the fact that these men pushed their way into a home in an attempted robbery and did kill her husband, but that is an odd detail. Here's another thing that bugged me. Why did they arrest every person who had been near the home at the time of the invasion with no real evidence? Not just pulled them in for questioning, not just checked on their alibis, literally arrested them for stupid reasons like being a black man or wearing the same size hat or being a man with a bad reputation. That's flimsy. I don't know. Also, why was the police detective in charge so ready to give up? Like he says, there's not enough evidence here to convict these men. I mean, they could not have done this. There's no evidence against them. But I don't think we're ever going to really find out who did it. So, And who was not paying attention to the mail? Okay? It was only a couple of weeks between the home invasion and the confession of Otto Keller, like 6 weeks. But he said that he sent a letter like 2 weeks after. Why was nobody paying attention to the mail? Like, hello? Did he sign it? Did he not sign it? I don't know. I don't even know. And maybe, let's just be honest, my brain could be pulling at strings because of the lack of information involved. I literally found one source that told the story with enough detail to retell it to you. I found it fascinating because of the lack of information on their lives, especially Sarah, like who are her parents. I found it fascinating because Washington was a public figure and so little was written about his life. Like the most written about him was about his death. So I don't know. My brain is probably looking for strings to pull, but this did strike me as a rather interesting story. I don't know. Maybe I'm looking for conspiracy where there's not one. But literally, Sarah's detail difference makes me wonder if she was in on it. But then again, I watched all 14 seasons of Women Who Kill on Hulu, so, you know. Who knows what is going on? All right, we're just about finished with the card. I have a lot of more things I could say about the story, but it's all conspiracy, and there's nothing to back it up, so I'll just keep those thoughts to myself. I did stamp this little sentiment that says, hope anchors the soul. It is a scripture reference that is added to this stamp set. And I did go around it using that same dark brown ink pad to kind of add some shadow to the edges, just to kind of pull it up off the background a little bit. This card was super quick and easy to make. The coloring was, I was worried about the plumeria because the plumeria flower petals grow in kind of a pinwheel fashion, and I was a little bit worried about getting all the shadows in properly. I'm going to do it again in another color, but I like how the shadows landed in this. So, you know, here's a close-up picture. We're going to zoom in. You can see all the gems and the details and things, but thanks for hanging out with me. I appreciate you. I have a couple other videos here that I think you will like. I also have that subscribe button. Tell me down below if you think my brain is just out in left field or if there's something weird here. Give me a thumbs up if you like the video, and have a really fabulous day.